Emerson not the highest paying group in the business, but it's not all about money. Leaders who tell don't get very far.
What do you feel like were the problems that you really wished you could have had technology to solve? Like that you're like, man, this is like a real burning problem.
The mistake that a lot of supply chain people make is it's all about the cost. And if I get it cheap enough, everybody's happy. But if that doesn't line up with what the business needs to service the customer, then you've missed the point.
We're here with Doug Johnson. Doug, thank you for joining the podcast. Doug's calling in from Frisco, Texas. He spent the last 24, maybe more years at Emerson. Is it more than that?
34.
34.
34
I
years.
misread that. Doug spent the last a very brief 34 years at Emerson, where he finished his tenure by leading the global supply chain as the vice president over there. And I met Doug a few years ago, and I'm really excited for the conversation.
It'll be fun. I enjoy talking about some of the things that are going on in the industry, and it's been fun to see it change over the last 30 years that I've been doing it. It's made a lot of changes.
Wow. So I'm kind of curious. 34 years is a long time. When you first started at Emerson, did you have in mind that this could be, where you'd build your entire career, or was it just a first job?
It was actually my second job, and I didn't like my first job, and I, got recruited up there and started actually in manufacturing engineering. I'm not a supply chain guru by training. I worked in manufacturing engineering, did a lot of capital projects, got moved from one side of the building to the other, and they said, "Hey, why don't you do quality?" I said, "Okay, I can do quality."
Okay.
And so I spent some time in quality, focused on suppliers. And then they said, well, we need to really expand our supplier quality program. And so they moved me over into the purchasing group, and I developed a supply chain program and ended up from there at some of the Emerson corporate offices doing audits. And they said, well, why don't you do supply chain sourcing? So kind of not exactly what I expected for a career, but really has been very good understanding the very pieces of the business. And we're a manufacturing company, so you understand all those different pieces, and that makes it very helpful as you start to deal with internal and external customers.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And, it's sort of funny. I posted the other day on LinkedIn, there was a study from McKinsey where they surveyed chief procurement officers to try to get a distribution of where they report into. So some CPOs report into finance, some report to the CEO, some report to the chief supply chain officer. I'm curious, where within Emerson did procurement and supply chain fall in the business?
Yeah, so the business I worked in, at one point, I reported to the president, and then we restructured, and I ended up reporting into operations.
Okay.
And, there's a lot of different ways you can structure organizations, but really understanding what you want from your supply chain makes a big difference on where you put it. And as a engineer to order business, supply chain critical piece sat in ops most of the time. I've worked in other structures, but primarily in operations, supporting the business.
Interesting. Was there ever a time where you felt like you got really close to making a jump from the business? You were there for 34 years. Was there ever a moment where an opportunity came along and it was like, look, Doug, like here's a moment where you can really apply your skills and knowledge in the new area? And how did you think through that? What made you ultimately decide, hey, look, I'm gonna stay the course. I'm gonna stay in the seat?
Yeah, I think I ended up, went through a period of time, and it's kind of interesting. I think it's really something that has helped me reflect is the reason I was really out looking was because I had a bad boss.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the company, really had some good people I was working with, really did not enjoy my boss or one level up there. And that really sent me out into the world looking at some things, and really came across some interesting opportunities, and kind of decided, I had a choice of staying or not staying, and I decided to stay. And since then, those people have moved on, and I've gone from that situation to the last 4 years I was there working for a phenomenal ops leader that 20 years ago used to work for me. So
Wow.
So I think
That's
the
amazing.
environment makes a big difference. And I think, Emerson, not the highest paying group in the business, but it's not all about money. If it is, then you're probably, it's really about the people that you work with. And I really enjoyed working with the team. And so I stayed.
That's great. It is funny. I've heard this kind of thing before, that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And so it couldn't be more true. I'm curious, like from that experience, like what did you learn about the way you wanted to approach your own management style? I have to imagine at that VP level, you probably had dozens, if not hundreds of people reporting into you.
But we ended up at about 120. Yeah.
Wow.
I think the mantra there that was kind of interesting that kind of came through was God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Yep.
And it is very hard for a person who's very direct, and I'm a direct manager, to use both ears and not solve the problem or provide a solution, but listen and help your team learn to solve. And it's so much more empowering. And the interesting thing is, since I've left, probably every couple of weeks, I'm talking to one of my team members. They're calling me and asking me a question, and I'm helping them think through some stuff. But it's really, from a leadership standpoint, leaders who tell don't get very far. Leaders who listen and build the team to be empowered really is helpful. And I'm just so proud of the teams that, I started them, but they've done just amazing things because they think.
That's amazing. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. When you met the person who ended up becoming the COO and ops leader that you reported into, how young were they? Was this like a college intern, or was this
Well, he
a
was
person?
he was early career. So he was in his late 20s, I think, when I met him. And
Yeah.
actually, when I moved into that business unit, he was a supplier quality engineer. Uh,
Okay.
he had brought in and to help us with our die casting business, and a great guy, multilingual, Asian background. And then we sent him over to China to help us start our first plant. And I spent many years with him developing a supply chain sourcing organization. And we started a plant in China, and then we also bought a plant in China, bought an operation. And so we worked
Hmm.
together for 20 plus years building that team. Then he came back to be my boss. Oh, no surprise. I know exactly. He's a great guy.
Amazing. That's fantastic. What were some of the well, prior, did Emerson have a plant in China?
Our business unit didn't. And so we had a really small little kind of a service business. And so this was to basically do a greenfield to move some production lines over there for export and for China. And then as we were over there, we made an acquisition of a company that I went in to do the supply chain and operations due diligence, and realized that they had one computer and one person who spoke English. Um, Due diligence was a little challenging, but a
Yeah.
phenomenal company. It grew from single digit millions in sales to almost 100 million in about 15 years on the same site. So it really, really grew. And so it's been fun to watch.
That's amazing. And, I'm kind of curious a little bit about, when you said you came in to build a supplier quality program, what does that typically entail? And how do you think about supplier quality as a distinct function versus being part of the responsibility of like a sourcing manager or category manager? Where does the role start and end? And what does a supplier quality program that you think is good entail?
One thing, and I spent some time in quality and then over in supplier quality, that was kind of the bridge to sourcing, is understanding that everything fits in an organizational team to drive where you're going. And if supplier quality is there just to do audits and say this is bad, and to have a manual and to do those things, and it doesn't integrate into the business as to what we're trying to achieve, you're really not very successful. You can have phenomenal audits. And strangely enough, my wife was a career auditor, quality auditor for nuclear power. So,
Wow.
but versus an industrial company, that's a totally different beast. And you need to really understand how it fits into the business and where it brings value. That's, you can run all the if your measurement is how many audits you did. Okay, right. I mean, the business doesn't care, but if you're looking at the performance of that supply chain and how you're performing to customers, that's how you line up to get the most successful business. Is keeping that alignment as to how does it serve the business versus how many audits did I do.
Right. And so how do you make the decision, and this is a question that I'm asking, even though I know it's not totally answerable, between supplier quality and pricing, right? And, I came to this all the time when I was back at Tesla, where we'd have 2 or 3 or more suppliers. And one thing that's certain is we know what prices they're quoting us because that's a number. But then there was a lot more subjectivity, at least at Tesla, about, well, what if we go with a US based supplier? They're closer, the lead times are a little shorter. But the China supplier, although the shipping is longer, they might be more agile on things like tooling rework because they've got such great capability over there. And then quality was always an open question. So how do you instruct? Well, how do you think about it, and then how do you instruct your team to think about that kind of thing?
I think the quality and the standards that go with quality they're mostly binary, which is either it is or it isn't, right? And either they can meet the specs or they can't meet the specs, and you need to kind of have a floor there. But then as you go into the business, the thing that and I've been in a couple of business, you have to align with the business needs. So if you look at, to me, there's 3 pillars. It's lead time, on time, and cost. And depending on your business, one product line is extremely cost sensitive. Cost ends up being a real significant driver. You can't give up on lead time and on time, but you've got to hit that cost target. The last set of products that I spent a lot of time managing was very, I would say, assembled to order, customized stuff. Lead time and on time was critical, and you won business based on lead time and on time. Cost is always important, but the mistake that a lot of supply chain people make is it's all about the cost, and if I get it cheap enough, everybody's happy. But if that doesn't line up with what the business needs to service the customer, then you've missed the point.
Right. Well, how often to service the customer did you find that your supply base as is was sufficient, and you could bring, whether it's existing product or new product, to suppliers that you'd vetted, that you knew, versus saying, hey, look, we have to go out and find like totally new supply for this kind of thing? And, when I think about Emerson, I mean, there are emerging areas of the business that, include, things like mining and minerals, which have become a much, or rare earth metals, which have become like a big topic for supply chain for EVs globally. And so there's often the need for new suppliers. I'm curious, how often did you find yourself going out to find new sources, new suppliers? Is this a frequent thing or daily thing, or
very common? Because the product mix is kind of engineered to order, make to order, very high mix. So
right?
And I think that drives a lot of supply chain needs. And then an overarching umbrella strategy for us is, can we source in the world area where we build? Right. So as we expanded sales in China, or we expanded sales in Eastern Europe, we had an operation in Romania. How can I be more regional in my supply base so that I can hit that lead time on time? So there was quite a bit of new sourcing work as we went through new products, and really more as we globalized pieces of business. And that business may have been only made in Tulsa, but now it needs to also be made in Chengdu. Right now, you got to come up with a new supply base to hit that lead time, on time, cost. All of my sitting in my office doing video calls, on the wall behind me, it says speed wins.
Really?
So, yes, that was the mod, because that lead time and on time was more important than cost. You want it all, but if in most of those things, speed wins. If you can get to the customer with a quality product at a reasonable cost, you win.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking about it from the perspective of the revenue side too. I feel like that's not actually that common in a way.
Unfortunately, many of my peers look at, what's my price?
Right.
And if you're not integrated into business success, then you just get pegged in this corner of, well, your stuff's cheap, but it's not very good and it never comes when we want it. So you really have to be part of the team that says, how do we holistically look through the business to the customer? Who pays your bills? This is
Right.
how do I make that customer happy? How do I design a supply network so that the customers are happy?
How do you, I guess here's a question, like, if you're in procurement, how do you get visibility into the revenue side of the business? And how do you measure whether the things that you're doing are driving revenue, and then make sure that the executives around the table look at procurement and give it the credit for that, the things like velocity, when so often, we're measured on things like, your cost takeout year over year.
Easy to measure, kind of can be kind of fuzzy. I think we had a very good leadership team. And the interesting thing there is I had a seat at the table, even though I was one. It was everybody who reported to the president plus me. And so there was a value to supply chain, and that I'd been in the company forever, so I kind of knew where some of the bodies were buried that we tried before. Right? We tried that. Here's what happened. And I think there was, I spent a lot of time with our sales guy, a good friend of mine. His office just around the corner, understanding what the needs were. And instead of coming to that leadership group and saying, this is my stuff that I need to do, it's where does the business need to succeed, and where do we need to deploy resources? Is that more in engineering? Is it more in sales? Is it more in operations? Where do we need to deploy resources, and where do we need to improve to drive customer value? And when you work in that direction, you make a lot more progress. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of rocks thrown over the fence at each other. You got to be senior leadership's got to be on the same page.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. Has there ever been you mentioned, you had this question about, you'd been there so long that you knew where all the bodies were buried, and also, what we tried it had not worked. That's a very powerful and dangerous place to be in, because at one level, it's to have that experience is great, and you can be sort of like the elder for the folks around. It's guiding but at the same time, like, the reason that something didn't work a year ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, it may be different circumstances today. So I'm kind of curious, was there ever a time where you said, hey, look, this is something that we tried, it didn't work, and then you were like, wow, like, actually, I said, I'll let you guys try it. They went ahead with it, and actually it ended up being a great idea. And it's like, the tectonic plates had shifted beneath our feet, and so it was the right, wrong idea, wrong time before. Now is right idea, right time.
Yeah, it's time based, but there was a particular situation. We had a global supplier that we were using at a number of plants that was really having some performance issues. And I had worked with them, been in there, had some conversation, and basically had written them off and said, this isn't going to work, folks. They're not going to be able to get it done. And, my team was kind of in the mode of, I think there's some things we could do here. I think some of those problems we created, and they were willing to challenge what I was saying. And I said, that's fine. Go do what you're going to do, but it isn't going to work out.
Sure.
A couple of years later, they were an award-winning supplier. So I was like, well, clearly I didn't know everything, but
that's great.
Part of that is training your team or encouraging that environment to go, you know what? I don't think you're right. That was very challenging as I went into China in the first round of stuff, where the senior guy from the US shows up and you just do what he says. And I was leading a team that I actually taught to disagree with. I would throw crazy stuff out and make them disagree with me, and they thought I was crazy. But I needed that local input. Otherwise, it was just another white guy showing up in China that didn't really know what he was doing. You got to use that team. It's something they will tell you.
Interesting, because they would tell you, because there's a culture of respecting the seniority, that kind of thing. Interesting. It's really fascinating. How, when a supplier is giving you problems, what is that like? I mean, how often is it, reactive versus proactive? Like, the relationship manager comes to you and says, hey, Doug, like, I just have to give you a heads up. Like, we've had a few short shipments, or we've had some quality issues, and we're working through it, versus it being like, you pick up the phone, you say, look, I just heard this from my manufacturing team. Like, why didn't you elevate it before? And then how many chances do you give them, and how do you decide when it's time to cut bait, you know?
And it is a challenge there because I don't have the bandwidth, nor do I want every problem showing up on my desk. Right. I want
Right.
teams to solve those things. And sometimes, it goes back and forth. Sometimes they're good at bringing me in at the right time, which is they need some leverage either with another team or with a supplier or something else. And sometimes they wait too long. And it's a pretty difficult thing to manage because very hands-on managers that manage every problem really don't get anything done. But if you don't
Yeah.
teach the team when to come see you and know that they're not just not going to get chewed out every time they show up, it's difficult. Yeah. But as the senior leader and because sales was in the same, just around the corner from me, I heard about a lot of things. But usually by the time I got up to the sales leader, it really wasn't all the facts. It had been manipulated multiple times. And it was just, you had to get back to the facts and help the team and go, okay, what's going on here? And sometimes they should have talked to me, and sometimes it was the appropriate time. It came up, and they were dealing with it the right way. And bringing me in any earlier probably would have just caused more chaos, and I wouldn't got the rest of my job done.
Right, that's true. No, it's really interesting. Do you feel like how do you feel about the in-person work culture that seemed like it was really helpful to you? You know, you had the sales guy right around the corner from you, and so it seemed like you heard a lot of stuff. There's a lot of, I would say, just chance encounters and conversations that probably provide not just social but real business value. I mean, what was the shift like to remote during COVID? How did that feel? And how do you think about the fact that the world has gotten sort of, I would say, stuck in this place where it feels like being in office is somehow an option, but not a requirement, you know?
There's kind of two sides to that. One is since I was managing a global team, some of that wasn't in person that I was managing anyway, right? So I had to learn to work some of that remotely. But I do think that water cooler conversations, use an old term, and having those conversations with other people is important. And there's a little tension. Do I think everybody needs to be in the office every day, all the time? I don't think that's always necessary. But if you never see your peers, you never have chance encounters with your peers, I don't think you're as strong. So there's a tension and a balance in there. And yes, we can get on a video call and have a meeting, but I've never had a video call as I was walking down the hallway and ran into somebody. Right. And there was just some times that I think being in the same building and at least being in the same environment makes a lot of sense. So there's some tension there that you have to work with, and I'm a fan of if we're doing remote calls, I'm a fan of seeing your face. I don't care what you look like. I don't care if the dog's running around in the background or the kids are screaming. I'd like to see you, and so I think when we have part of the culture that says, "Hey, I'm on the call, but you're never going to see my face," I think you miss some of the interaction. And
Yeah, it's true. You do definitely do miss something. I agree with you. I mean, I try my best to be on video for calls, but you know, it's so tough in our business because, you know, I mean, look, if I went back and, you know, if I think back in the last 4 years, right, I'm in meetings from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 5 days a week minimum, right? And so sometimes you got to eat, and it's kind of like, okay, is this an internal meeting that I can take while making a sandwich? Because it's just that, or I have to block time on my calendar. I'd rather be there, you know? So it is tough. I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, how do you feel about, you know, some of the things? Have you been staying close to the world of, you know, AI and procurement technology? And not everybody, to be honest, needs to be a tech evangelist going to all the conferences to learn about all the latest technologies. But I'm curious, you know, how close you'd gotten to some of the new things that the world is sort of developing, and
well,
you
if you're
know,
close to these things, you're always behind. I mean, heavens, my just the way my Gemini AI works changes every week. I mean, so there's so much going on in that, but it has been an area that I have spent quite a bit of time looking at after I've retired because I think there's an opportunity with a lot of my peers to come back and go, look, here's some things that are going on. sometimes when you're in the seat, you don't have the time to step back, read some reports, chat with people like you, understand what's going on. You're too busy with, I need a solution today, and that's what you do. So I've been doing quite a bit of work there. And actually been advising a couple of companies on some of their AI stuff and some of just general operations, but more now than when I was actually full time doing my supply chain job.
Interesting. What do you feel like beyond your personal bandwidth? What do you feel like were some of the big blockers that you see in large corporations related to bringing technology in, and maybe on the converse side, asking about like from the perspective of a startup founder, technologist like myself, what are things that startup founders could be doing better to speak the right language of the big corporates and get their foot in the door in the right way?
Yeah, I think the feedback there that I've run into in a number of companies is, here's a solution. Let's go find a problem.
Right.
And really is what understanding what the needs of the businesses are. And I think that's difficult in AI or anything else because you've got such a diverse customer base. If you come back and are bringing in AI and talking to me in when I was in the previous seat, there is, hey, I'm really focused on how do I manage this S&OP process, use AI up here to be more intelligent with my suppliers. A different firm may have a different need that is more, hey, I need to know whenever I need to know all of the risk management that's going on around the world. And so the challenge there is understanding the customer need versus I have a product. Let me see if I can get this. Let me see if I can talk about it in a way that it might seem like it would work. I think that's the challenge that you run into. What is that real need? And then understanding the ecosphere that you're working in. Not everybody is at a very advanced level. A lot of paranoia about AI. I mean, we had tremendous amounts of data, but it was so unstructured that if you dropped AI on top of it, you just got very efficient regurgitation of garbage. So you got to go you need data structure before you can go deal with the data.
Right, right. What do you think is the AI paranoia that you see? Is it more people worried that they are, they're going to lose their jobs because of AI, or is it more like, hey, we're going to implement something that's going to go awry, or is it more, I'm afraid of not adopting AI, and like if I don't get enough technology, I'm going to be left behind. Those are all, by the way, in conflict. So I'm kind of curious.
The high level conflict that I saw in a lot of different companies is working with is all of our data is going to become stolen and become public data. They become extremely security focused on the data because you threw the term AI in. When in reality, the current data structure probably has more holes in it than the new structures were. But there's this leaking of data, all of our trade secrets. Sometimes they're not really trade secrets, but people think they are. It's going to be out there in the public and it's going to kill our business. And it becomes that fear versus going in and going, okay, what do we need to do? How do we create our own data lakes, right? How do we manage our data and use that appropriately? And I think the first barrier that I've run into has been the security piece. And then the second one, as we started to look into some stuff, was our data is so poorly structured that you really need to spend more time on that before you drop a nice engine on top of it. Otherwise, you're feeding dirty gas into the engine, just doesn't run well.
And I agree with you. And it's sort of interesting. You made this point about people think something's a trade secret, but really isn't. I see that all the time. When we work with companies, sometimes they'll say, we're going to share with you our Excel templates for quoting out whatever category logistics, but you got to make sure that this doesn't appear in anybody else's workspace. And I'll see the template and I'll be like, that's the same as the one that everybody else is using. Like we'll treat it as very proprietary, but I mean, it's not that special, but you can't say that to people, you say, okay,
I think there's a lot of people, a lot of value in the data they've created, but it's a tool. And, I think the challenge I saw was, I would say probably has been a challenge for the AI is there was a big move around developing BI tools and citizen developers around BI tools. which was very helpful until nobody realized there needed to be a landscaping plan before you started planting trees. I joked with our some of our data guys. I need AI for my BI because I couldn't find any. There was 20 different BI tools, right? And so I think you have to have a master plan that says where do we need to go, and then start putting stuff together. And that's a challenge for some of the things in the AI is, are you coming in and putting this on top of, we had an Oracle or an SAP, and how are these things going to interface? And every interface you have always has a challenge. It takes a long time to make those work. I mean, and who's going to be the players there? Because sometimes you wake up and you realize, well, now I've got 20 different software packages that mostly talk to each other until somebody does an update. Then they don't.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it all breaks. I mean, that was the challenge with RPA, right? That was the original agentic system, 10, 20 years ago. You mentioned something earlier that I love, which is, that you don't want to be a solution looking for a problem. And I always tell our team this too. And I actually tell customers this directly, which is, I don't want to be a solution looking for a problem. And, I remember the original Segway back in 2003, something like that. And it was like great technology, balancing two-wheeled scooter, but walking wasn't a problem for most people. So, technology, very expensive, $5,000 device could be replaced with a $200 bicycle, right? If that's what you really want. And so there are often really simple solutions that solve the problem if you're anchored in the problem, not just the tech gizmo.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious, like, to ask the other side of that, like, what do you feel like were the problems that you really wished you could have had technology to solve? Like, that you're like, man, this is like a real burning problem. Or another phrasing of this question, Doug, would be if you had a kid who was like saying, Dad, I want to build a procurement and a supply chain technology business, and they gave you an idea, and you're like, no. This is if you can nail this is something that everyone I know would buy.
So in that business, it's exactly what it was, is you're a high mix, inconsistent demand business that wants to manage their cost of capital and their capital assets well, inventory. How can I forecast demand? Okay. And then I guess the other key piece is customer expected lead time shorter than supply chain lead time.
Yeah.
How can I forecast better? Perfectly, because you never will be. How can I take the disparate data that frankly was a lot of our sales guys going, I think I'm gonna sell 50 of those, right?
Yeah.
And use AI, machine learning, historic internal and external data to be a little bit better on what we told that supplier. That was, to me, the holy grail. If you could start at the front end, all of this back end of PO release, change date, move in, move out, cancel, all of that gets a little bit better. It's never solved. But if you can be a little bit better at the front end on what demand is going to be, I think that makes a big difference. Big difference, at least in the business I was in.
And is that about demand, like forecasting, like the volumes, or is that about more of the general timeline management around NPI, like first shipment date and all the, the Gantt chart stuff, stacking up?
That business, it was more around production, product life cycles, 20, 30 years, right? So not the same ramp in, ramp out, Gantt chart kind of stuff. Really, it was, we've been selling this product for 20 years, and what's going on in the market so that more people now need the carbon steel version versus the cast iron version. Something's changing, right? What's going on? Why did we see that shift? What was behind that you could come back in and lay into your forecast? You tend to be always behind the bullwhip of, oh, well, demand has shifted to something else. Why? Competitors did something else. But being able to recognize nonlinear forecasting and be able to adapt, to me, was the holy grail that I thought we needed to spend a lot more time. Because if you don't do that well, as you get into the sourcing piece, you get into the supply chain piece, you're dealing with moving targets. And suppliers would always tell you, just give me a PO, I'll ship you the part, but don't change the date 5 times.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting. And can you look at historicals? Is that enough to look at like the
Yeah,
spend cube?
yeah, you can look at the spend cube, but things in the market change too. So, one of the things that'll change, especially in the North American market, is as oil prices would go up or down. There was a piece of the business that was toward oil patch, right? And if you looked at historic, you were always wrong,
Right.
high or too low. But seeing what West Texas Intermediate was doing would be an input, along with how many new wells are being created, what's going on in that space. Same thing in a chemical space. There's just a lot. There were so many end spaces for that business, but to be able to be a little bit more intelligent and not linear. It tended to be, well, last year we sold 1,200, so we're going to sell 100 a month. Now we sold 1,200, but we sold 600 of those in June and 600 of them in July. That's different than we sold
Yeah.
100 a month. And so being able to dig through that data, use machine learning AI to go, let's be a little bit better. I don't have any illusion that this will be perfection, but
Right.
perfection toward a little bit better way to forecast where your lead times are longer than customer expected brings a lot of value. Brings a lot of value.
Did you ever have like a data scientist work on this problem internally? Because I feel like often people, I mean, look, AI is great. It's not a magic bullet, right? And you have to start with, I often tell the team it's like first solve it by hand, then try to automate, delegate, and then automate, right? So it's sort of three steps. First solve it yourself, then find a low cost, efficient way of doing it, and then automate it. And so, because AI won't find the pattern if a capable data science or engineer can't do it, month by hand in Excel, do a better model,
A lot of that set of what we would call S&OP processes, and it was run
Yep.
on uh, two things that I think are that are a concern. One is expecting linearity, and so the person
Yep.
could manage this smart person, but not really a data scientist, and kind of a mindset that you see sometimes, which is, hey, the forecast is good enough, and you've got to be driving to that next level of accuracy. It's never going to be perfect, but I think there was a resistance to that, and a lot of the fee inputs were internal inputs. So that was one of my challenges is, okay, well, the sales guys said they're going to sell 1,200. Well, okay, what's going on in the market? What's going on in China, in Romania, in India, in the US? And what's going on in those things that could change that linearity? Take that sales guy's forecast and what he's doing, because he's right there in the market, but mix it with something else. And then do a feedback loop that said, well, we were going to do this. How many did we actually use? Use that feedback loop. And we tended to be pretty linear. Well, we'll just change it going forward, but we don't really look at how accurate were we and what was the factor that changed that. And it wasn't data science, it was Excel science.
Mm. Yeah, of course. Do you think the sales team has a little bit of happy ears, or they think that they're optimistic, or do you think or do you think they don't want to set the bar too high? Like which direction they usually?
I see. We've got some phenomenal sales team that understand their customers. I think they're when it's going down, they're resistant to the down, and when it starts to go back up, they're a little resistant to the up because the last turn. And to me, I love the guys. It is you tended to have a curve that was trailing, so you're either chasing one way or chasing the other way, and it's a momentum of humans. We tend to put human emotions on top of that stuff, and it doesn't. There's we need that input, but you need to bring some other mathematics and some AI and some machine learning into that says let's pull other data sources and correlate them to be able to manage.
Fascinating. And when you made your adjustments, did you have to get sign off from the sales guy? Like, hey, by the way, like I'm adjusting you down a little bit because I don't want to hold this inventory.
We actually went through a multi-step S&OP process and had a sales input, and then we would come back out, and in some cases the sales forecast was different than the ops expectations, and we recognized the variance that said here's why it's different. You guys are and we're going to go here, we don't believe that, Here's what's going on. Here's what we're going to put in the forecast. And we let that tension be. We didn't
Okay.
force the alignment. We said, hey, here's what we see. Here's what you see. We're pretty close. Directionally the same, but here's why we don't think that that's quite the way we should go. And each person was kind of responsible for their forecast.
Interesting. It's interesting the let the tension be perspective. I feel like I don't hear that very often. People want to get to a number that they are marching towards.
Well, and at the high level where we're talking in the finances, the finance guy's got to get to a number, and he sits in that meeting and listens to all of the stuff, listens to the plans, and he has to get to a number that we're running the business as. But internally, let that tension be, understand the differences. It's not about, it's really not about being the person being right. It's about, is the business successful?
Fascinating. Well, look, I want to be conscious of time. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. It was a joy, as always, to speak with you, and an even better joy to have a record of it that we can look back on. I think the audience will really gain a lot of insights from your experience. And we went from everything from New York bagels and pizza to barbecue in Dallas, to supplier quality, to 34 years in the seat of a business and having seen it all, good, bad, and the ugly. So really, really appreciate your time, Doug. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate the time. And, my passion is helping those that are still out there doing this and taking the experiences I have with being able to help more people be successful. I really enjoy that, and I enjoy staying in the business.
Well, I can see that's the case, and I really appreciate it, Doug. And I hope folks reach out to you after watching this and say that they need a little bit of your advice on something that's really thorny.